5 years into Ukraine, and Vladimir Putin just signed himself a new license. A fresh Russian law hands the Kremlin a legal pretext to send troops into any country where a Russian citizen claims to need protecting. The Baltics are watching. Poland is watching, because the playbook that started in Donetsk just went global. As Russian forces continue to pound Ukraine, Moscow has introduced a new law that could dramatically widen President Vladimir Putin's military powers beyond the battlefield. On May 13th, the Russian parliament approved a bill granting Putin the authority to deploy troops into foreign countries under the pretext of protecting Russian citizens abroad. According to the State Duma documents, the bill was drafted to protect the rights of Russian citizens in the event of their arrest, detention, criminal prosecution, or other prosecution pursuant to decisions of foreign courts vested with criminal jurisdiction by other foreign states without Russia's participation. Putin has 14 days to sign the bill into law. Defending the bill, State Duma chairman Vyacheslav Volodin accused Western nations of turning international justice into a repressive machine aimed at punishing those who oppose European political interests.
Western justice has turned into a repressive machine for dealing with those who disagree with the decisions imposed by European officials. In these circumstances, it is important to do everything to ensure that our citizens abroad are protected.
Ukraine has blasted the legislation as another sign of Moscow's growing expansionist ambitions, warning that the Kremlin is openly turning military aggression into official state policy.
This decision can be described in 2 words: aggressive lawlessness. By granting himself the unlimited right to use Russian occupation forces outside the country under the pretext of supposedly protecting Russian citizens, Putin is effectively admitting that aggression has become the norm of Russian state policy.
Moscow has previously justified its invasion of Ukraine in 2022 by claiming that it was protecting Russian-speaking regions of the country, including Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson. Russia still demands the reinstatement of the Russian language and the Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine as part of any peace agreement. This year, various European intelligence agencies have labeled Russia as a direct threat to NATO and the West. Officials from the European Union have expressed concern that Putin will initiate a conflict with Europe within the next year or two to test the United States' commitment to NATO. At the same time, the Pentagon has cancelled plans to temporarily deploy 4,000 US-based troops to Poland. The decision, first reported by Army Times, came just 2 weeks after the Pentagon announced it was withdrawing 5,000 troops from NATO ally Germany, in part due to a widening rift over the Iran war between US President Donald Trump and Europe. Moscow's continued missile and drone assaults on Ukraine have already seen Russian weapons breach NATO territory, driving European states to ramp up their defense capabilities in response. Last month, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky warned that the Baltic countries might become Moscow's next target if Ukraine doesn't get enough support. Moscow itself has issued numerous threats to Europe since the beginning of its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. In December last year, Putin said Russia is ready to fight a war with Europe if provoked in his latest threat against the West.
Мы не собираемся воевать с Европой, я уже об этом 100 раз сказал. Но если Европа вдруг захочет с нами воевать и начнет, мы готовы прямо сейчас. Здесь не может быть никаких сомнений. Только вопрос в чем? Если Европа вдруг начнет с нами войну, мне кажется, что очень быстро, это же не Украина. С Украиной мы там действуем хирургическим способом, аккуратненько, так? Чтобы, понятно, да? Это не война в прямом, современном смысле этого слова. Если Европа вдруг захочет начать с нами войну и начнет ее, то очень может быстро произойти ситуация, при которой нам не с кем будет договариваться.
With the war in Ukraine showing no signs of slowing down even in its fifth year, the new legislation is likely to deepen fears across Europe that the Kremlin is preparing for a broader and more confrontational foreign policy. Poland's Prime Minister has issued one of the starkest warnings yet from a Western leader about the threat Russia poses to NATO's eastern flank, saying an attack on alliance territory could come within months. Speaking to the Financial Times, Donald Tusk said the question keeping him and his neighbors up at night is no longer whether Russia might act, but whether the United States would respond if it did.
For the whole eastern flank, my neighbors, the question is if NATO is still an organization ready, politically and also logistically, to react, for example, against Russia if they try to attack. I'm talking about short-term perspectives, rather months than years. For us, it's really important to know that everyone will treat the NATO obligations as seriously as Poland. Washington treats Poland as the best and closest ally in Europe. But for me, the real problem is what it is in practice if something happens.
Tusk's comments land against a backdrop of deliberate Russian provocation. This week, Moscow flew nuclear-capable Tu-22M3 bombers over the Baltic Sea in a 4-hour show of force, with NATO fighters scrambling to intercept them. Russia's own defense ministry confirmed the escort, framing it as routine. Tusk later defended his comments.
There is no doubt. These are declarations from the American side, repeated for many, many months, that Europe must defend itself and must rely primarily on its own strength, along with the skepticism of the Washington administration towards NATO as such, towards the European Union as such. These are also not new. I want to shake up all those who want to live in delusions, in illusions. Russia is preparing for further acts of aggression. We know this. It doesn't just seem that way. We know it.
Russia, meanwhile, has accused Baltic states of allowing Ukrainian drones to use their airspace for strikes on Russian oil ports, claims NATO members flatly reject. Kremlin's Security Council Secretary Sergei Shoigu invoked Article 51 of the UN Charter, asserting Russia's right to self-defense. Tusk also made headlines for cracking a joke that there was immense relief among EU leaders for the latest summit, because for the first time in years, there were no Russians present in the room. Russia's top envoy Kirill Dmitriev hit back at the Polish leader.
See you in 2 months as you come to Russia to beg for energy. Please save enough jet fuel for the flight.
For Tusk, however, the answer lies in a Europe that stops depending on Washington's goodwill and starts building the practical tools to defend itself, describing European reintegration around common defense as his personal mission and, increasingly, a matter of urgency.